Okay, hello, Dr. Bynum. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to do it and to touch base with a lot of people and to sort of disseminate some of these ideas about.
According to your bio, you are a licensed psychologist and diplomat in clinical psychology. Can you define what that means, diplomat in clinical psychology?
Yeah, what that means is that you're a clinical psychologist. You went through a graduate program of one kind or another and received a Ph.D. or EDD or some form of doctoral degree, and you practice for a number of years in particular specialties after a while. And then you go and you sit for something beyond your license, which indicates a specialty, just as like they'll have a specialty in a particular forms of physical medicine, but they have them also in psychology. And a diplomate is that. You study a certain area, you go for further licensing and examination, and if you pass, um, you earn the diplomate status in the field. And so it's a further indication of your emphasis in certain areas, which is what I'm trying to do, and that's why we're meeting today.
So, your book is called Our African Unconscious, and the subtitle is The Black Origins of Mysticism in Psychology.
Yes, yes,
All right,
yes.
you want to explain that?
Well, our African unconscious is just that, our African unconscious. You know, uh, we all know that we have an unconscious mind, and many of us realize that we have a collective or share a mind with data and information and memories with all the other members of our species, and that's generally referred to as a collective unconscious. Well, that collective unconscious is rooted in our genes, our biology, our anthropology, and our deepest memories and histories as a species. And so I went back and my research in the field of psychology led me to explore the roots of our species, which, as we all know, in Africa. And then over time, it dawned on me that not only were we physically rooted in Africa, which is where modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, began walking about somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago, but also psychically, we began to develop the templates we have to relate to each other in terms of mother, father, family, tribe, group, also our cognitive functions. All of these develop in Africa, and then in the deep core of our memory, our brains, all three levels of our brains, and find expression in our language, our symbols, and so forth. And so, because it was rooted in Africa, prior to any kind of differences in so-called racial surface ethnicities, we all shared that African template for 200,000 plus years. Some of you may or may not be aware that so-called racial differences, diversifications, only began in our species maybe 25,000, 35,000 years ago, according to most anthropologists. But us as a species, modern man, Homo sapiens sapiens, began around somewhere between 150 to probably a little bit more than 200,000 years ago. The exact dates are difficult, but all that time, our psyche has been developing on the African savannas and in the forests and so forth. And so I labeled it our African unconscious, our common inheritance, deeper than our individual surface identities. It would be something like this. We each have an individual identity as as me, as you, as whomever. But we are also usually members in some expanded form of individual families. Okay, well, that family unconscious is closer to the kind of African unconscious we're talking about, as opposed to our individual, personal, specific unconscious minds. And so it not only involves our physicality, but also our psyche, deep psyche, which is the root of not only our intellectual capacities, but also our spiritual intuitions. And these two come together in our African unconscious.
I think people generally all have similarities, but we also
Mhm.
have differences. And I'm going to get away from racial and ethnic differences because I think they're insignificant.
That's the point. That's the point of this book,
Okay.
that they are surface permutations, but there's a deep ocean that binds and unites us in the same great water.
Right. On the other hand, people do have different skill sets.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
right. So, what is some of the common thread that runs through all of us?
Well, some of the deeper common threads who run through all of us that sometimes we don't even think about is our similarity in blood type, our similarities in our capacity to actually think and reason, our intimate intuition about uh, spiritual reality, spiritual matters, our deep grasp intellectually of certain kinds of concepts and ideas. And while there may be differences in that, we have the capacity to understand a certain kind of way. Okay, we don't understand the world the way, say, an intelligent creature like a dolphin or an elephant understands the world. We understand the world as a species very differently because of our experience, our history, and our capacities. So that is some of the deep commonalities. There are physiological similarities, including the structure and anatomy and the functioning of our brain, our neuroscape, our intelligence. So these are innumerable phenomena and things and dynamics and realities that we all share. And then there are serological or blood similarities. So it goes on and on. Our similarities are much deeper, longer based, and actually valuable to us than our individual ones. We as individuals come and go, as beautiful as that may be. But our families, our cultures, our civilization, and our species, that is much deeper and older, and in many ways, a lot wiser. At least that's my take on it.
Why do you think we as a world society have been so focused on our differences, political, racial, language, religious, and not connecting on the similarities?
Well, I think that a lot of that has to do in the time that we sort of like are asking ourselves the question. Uh, During this particular time of strife, our differences are magnified by the fact that we are able to communicate with each other in ways that we haven't been before. And while deep down, that is, let's say, reinforcing a great similarity and recognize those similarities between each other, there's also the need to separate, to differentiate, to grow beyond. And that goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I mean, here's a common example. Many of you, I'm certainly know about this. Uh, a child growing up in a family who's very young is very dependent on his parents, and this is a healthy thing. This is a very healthy thing that they go through stages of separating and differentiating and almost divisive within the family. It's not unhealthy. It's just the way it is. The first time you see that is around 2 years old, when the young son or daughter goes through their period of negativity. You know, not this, not that. They're not being hostile. They're just separating, differentiating themselves from their family of origin. You know, another great time this happens is in adolescence, when there is a necessary breaking away, separating, and leaving. Well, we do this before coming back together as an adult. Better. Well, we do the same thing as a species. And at different times in history, we have been very, very together. And at other times, we have been pushed apart. And we tend to come together when we're under crisis, or where there is a great deal of sort of abundance and wealth that is shared. But during times of perceived scarcity, and when we're not sure what the next step is going to be, that is when we tend to become more fractious, more fragmented. And that is part of the period that we're going through now. This will not last. This will not last. We will find our common, deeper collective origins and identities with each other. And that's part of what our African unconscious is about. It's about locating the deep, deep primordial connections we all share with each other, and moving beyond this unnecessary fragmentation and fractiousness we all have. You know, at one time, all human beings a long, long time ago, before we spread out over the globe, we may have spoken a same language, a mother tongue, it's referred to as. And then as we spread and differentiated over history, time, and civilizations, many different languages in our family, in our group, and our species came and went. Right now, there are maybe 6,900 human languages, but all of them share the roots of that fundamental mother tongue, mother language that we left Africa with. And many different linguists can see that. We can see that anthropologically. We see that in our DNA, you know? So the most separated aspects of us are mostly in our politics, but our medicine is not that splintered. Our anthropology is not that splintered. Our history is not that splintered. Even our civilizations are not that splintered. It's mostly right now our politics, which is kind of a sad commentary on us, but this is the situation we're in.
The splinter between us is politics, and politics is man-made.
That's right.
So we created this division amongst ourselves for what purpose? Power?
Many different purposes. Power being one of them. The capacity to, control others. A lot of not so noble reasons. Yes, that's true. But it is also true. I want folks to understand this. That in times of deep crisis, people very often overcome their individual pulls in one way or another. Look at what happens in disasters. People can have different political opinions about all kinds of stuff, but all of a sudden there's a great flood or fire. Neighbor comes out and helps neighbor, and they don't care about your politics. Okay, so there's something deeper in us that pulls us together during times of crisis, and we are in one of those crisis periods now. Ecologically, environmentally, we are at a critical point. We're also at a critical point in history. We're beginning to leave the planet. The early days of space exploration purely by governments is still there, but it's now being supplanted by the entrepreneurial exploration of space, the commercial use of space now. So we as a species are beginning to also leave the planet. We're in our early stages, but we're beginning to leave the planet, but we're also dealing with this fragmentation and a global crisis of unprecedented proportions. So you and I, our children, our neighbors, our relatives, our families are all engaged in this, and we need to love each other or we're not going to make it. And that is the sort of psychological, ecological, and in some sense, spiritual imperative that we're all under, regardless of our politics,
I've had people on the show who said that they thought that this COVID pandemic was going to be the uniting factor for us. I don't see that as happened.
It has not been as uniting as it could be because a lot of people, for political reasons, not for health reasons, but political reasons, have gotten themselves into a conflicted relationship with the larger organization, so to speak, and we have made war with each other unnecessarily. But you know what? If this COVID was not as tame as it has been, we would probably be further along that. What do I mean by that? If this had been a crisis of Ebola, where people died within 2 days, and infection was obvious to see and it spread very, very quickly, it would have been very difficult to make this a political issue. It would have remained what it is essentially, a health issue. A health issue. And nobody has the right to infect someone else. You have the right to not get vaccinated if you don't want to. That's okay. But you do not have the right, the capacity, or I should say the right, to infect someone else. But this has become a political issue as opposed to a public health issue. It is a public health issue. So I still hold out hope. I'm an optimist. I am an optimist, and I remain an optimist about us and our species. We've overcome many things in the past. Many things in the past. We're going to overcome this also. We have to.
Well, I certainly hope so. And I would hope that it's not going to take pushing us to the brink of nuclear destruction before we come together.
We were at the point of nuclear destruction in the early 60s during the Kennedy administration.
Yes.
With the Bay of Pigs. And we came within a hair's length, a hair's breadth of it. And after that began our nuclear treaties after that, because it scared both sides. Well, we may face a similar situation like that around our environmental crisis, because we cannot simply be up here in North America, in the northern part of North America, by the way, and forget about those of our brothers and sisters and cousins and family members who live in the southern parts of the United States or in the western parts of the United States where there's a drought or there's flooding. We can't stand it and say, well, that's not my problem. Yes, it is our problem. So crises have a tendency to bring us together and help us to recognize our fundamental roots. And I do have faith, and it is faith, but I do have faith that we're going to do that of necessity. It is a categorical imperative that we do this.
Well, Doctor, we do have to wrap this up. We are out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Oh, yes, I do. My website is easy to find. It's www.obeliskfoundation.com, like an Egyptian obelisk and foundation, one word, .com, www.obeliskfoundation.com. And there are essays about this on there. There's the book in much more detail about our African unconscious, the research behind it, and some other things that I think folks would find interesting. But I appreciate it, and I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to reach so many people.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. It was my pleasure. And best of luck with your book.